Literature Festival. So the book launch session now is The Idle Stance of the Tippler Pigeon by Safinah Danish Elahi, and the moderator is Taha Kehar. Taha is a journalist, novelist, and literary critic with 3 acclaimed novels to his name, typically Tanya, Of Rift and Rivalry, and the recent one, No Funeral for Nazia. Over to you, Taha.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to chair this session with Safinah Danish Elahi for her new novel, The Ideal Stance of the Tippler Pigeon. The book was released earlier this year by Nametree Press in the UK and has now been published by Liberty Books in Pakistan. So hello, Safinah.
Hello, Taha. How are you doing?
First, let the audience know what your inspiration for this book was. Where did it come from?
I think with the Tippler Pigeon, I'm just going to refer to it as Tippler because it's such a long name. I knew that I wanted to write the story. I just didn't know what the story was exactly. So I remember that I was doing a law internship, and this was during COVID. And I had a lot of time on my hands because most of the staff at the law firm wouldn't come physically. So I would just be sitting there for 5 hours every day. And I started writing this story. And this story is actually based in my childhood home. So when I think about the Hashim's house, it's my home from Alhambra when I was 10.
Okay.
And the story about Misha and Zuhaib and Nadia is a story about friendship and a story about class differences. And this is something that I've always sort of been very attuned to. The staff in the house, how do we deal with them, how do we act around them, and how in our Pakistani society, we feel very charitable when we give our staff a day off or we give them their salaries. It's almost a certain kind of complex ownership that we feel that we have, which is obviously not true. Every person has right to liberty, and it's just that relationship that we almost take advantage of, I feel, and I wanted to explore that.
So it's fascinating that you mentioned the class disparities because your novel deals with it in a very unique manner. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah.
So
I'd like to just tell a little bit about the story as well, so that people who haven't read the story can understand what the novel is about. The novel is about Misha and Zuhaib, who are a daughter and son to the Hashims, Faiza and Masood, and they live with their house help's daughter Nadia. So now Misha and Zuhaib are best friends with Nadia, and because they're children, they don't understand their class differences. So they play together, they love each other, they fight with each other, and only when the adults come in the picture do they realize that there's a difference. And the difference is that they belong to different classes. And I open the story with Nadia being in an office, and I do sort of fiddle around with the timeline. So we see flashbacks of Misha and Zuhaib and Nadia being children, and then we jump on to present day where Nadia is working in an office. So the reader's sort of wondering what's happening here, is this right now? Is Misha dealing with Nadia? But obviously as the story goes on, you understand that Nadia is now an adult, and we see that she has been plucked out of her class in sort of a middle working class environment. And where does she stand now? Coming from a village in Okara, living with the Hashims, being treated in a certain manner that, Faiza Hashim thinks is charitable, but is it? Is it really? Did she really treat her right? And the kind of, mental makeup and trauma that she goes through living in that house, did she end up better or worse than where she came from? So that is basically what the story is about.
it's interesting that you draw attention to the element of trauma in the novel because your novel seeks to destigmatize the conversation surrounding mental health, especially in the South Asian context. Can you tell us a little bit about how you deal with the idea of mental health.
Mental health here. So, not funnily, but incidentally, a lot of my work deals with relationships and trauma and therapy. And in Eye on the Prize, there's a woman who's seeking out for therapy, but in Tippler, there's this 25, 26-year-old boy who has suffered, trauma, and he is also seeing a therapist, psychiatrist. And I wanted to, make a point that it is okay, when we suffer grief, trauma, and fortunately so in Pakistan, we're able to now think that it's okay to reach out for help. For men, maybe it's harder, because you're just supposed to man up and deal with whatever grief you've been through. I'll try and not give spoilers of what his grief was, but I think conversations are important around mental health, because when you go through something, you cannot come out of it as you were before. You need to go through a certain process to be able to realize what happened to you and to be able to translate that into any kind of positive energy that you can later in your life.
So your previous novel, Eye on the Prize, many of us have read it, many of us have even seen it on screen because it became a very popular television show recently. That dealt with one character, Minahil, dealing with mental health issues, and she was in therapy. Was it different for you to write that from a male perspective, because you mentioned it's harder for men, and I do believe that men are less susceptible to therapy. They don't respond well to it, at least in the initial stages, and many of them don't even end up going for therapy until much later. How different was it to write that from a male perspective?
I think that Zuhaib was very difficult for me to write anyway.
Okay.
While I was obviously, you do a character sketch and you have to think about what a character is doing in every second of their life, right? What kind of shoes they wear, what kind of breakfast they have, what kind of personality they have, what have their experiences taught them to be the person they are in your book in that moment. Okay. So with Zuhaib, because he was in London, I've never lived in London, I've always visited, so having the knowledge of a person who has lived about a decade in the UK, he's in his mid-20s, somebody who's suffering with a great amount of grief, he was the most difficult for me to write. But at the same time, I feel like I enjoyed writing him as well, because he really pushed me as a writer. He pushed my boundaries, and I wanted to show that it's all right, even though his therapy was paid for by his father, and his parents weren't available in a way that you expect parents to be for their children when they go through a traumatic incident. But that therapy was maybe what kept him, around, because the suffering was so much that he wouldn't have been able to survive his post-grief years if he hadn't gone into therapy. So, and he calls Mr. Whitaker his friend, his first friend in London. So I guess just, destigmatizing mental health, and for men, I do know, my own friends, whoever has gone through something, even if it's, a loss of a parent or a divorce or whatever it is, grief comes in waves and different forms. And somehow men in our society are told to just, get on with it. And I think this is an aspect of our lives that we need to really pay attention to. But yeah, it was difficult for me to write Zuhaib, I think.
For most of you who are interested in this book, it's told from multiple character perspectives. And we've looked at Zuhaib. I think there are three major character perspectives. It's Nadia, Misha, and Zuhaib. And then there are other characters. We'll deal with that later. But tell me what drew you towards writing from different character perspectives. What was the advantage? What were the pitfalls of it?
So with Eye on the Prize, I feel like we can put that into contemporary genre. It was very linear, it was a lot of characters. There were 7 main characters who were kind of just going through their lives, overlapping, they were dealing with parenting, they were dealing with their social climbing, and there was a lot of issues that I sort of underlined in Eye on the Prize. But it was still easier for me to write. So in Tippler, I wanted to do something different. It's almost experimental for me. So it's almost like a letter format. I think it's called epistolary format, which is in first-person voice, and the three characters are almost speaking to themselves. But you can also feel like you know them better, because it's their internal thoughts as well. They're scenes, but they're also talking to themselves. So I would say it was an advantage for me to be able to put them in a time and space and just think from their minds. And it was a departure from my earlier writing as well.
It fascinates me because you have these three major characters and their perspectives, and then there are a few chapters that deal with the minor characters. So it's not like you've forgotten the minor characters. Can you tell us a little bit about some of them? You mentioned Faiza Osmani.
Faiza, yes. So
why do you think that was important as well?
Initially, Taha, it's really interesting that when you're a writer. So when we're writing, we don't actually know where the story is going to end up. Some people do, plot as they start writing. Some people know the ending first. With me, it was only going to be these three characters. Okay. It was never going to be Faiza or Gulshan or Masood Hashim, the minor, the mother, exactly, the father, the cousin. But I felt at some point, I said that, because these characters are talking to themselves, I want to show what Faiza is thinking. What was the mother thinking when all of this was happening? So, little things like when Misha is going to her grandfather's house, she sort of builds it up so much for Nadia, She says that, oh, there's a pool and we have so much fun, it's going to be such a grand time, we'll go to my grandfather's house. And Nadia, being, the 9-year-old, 10-year-old that she is, she thinks that everybody's just going to be like, okay, here comes Nadia, Little does she know that she is treated like a servant there. Okay. And she also doubts her choice of clothes. She's wearing a frock and she thinks that, why didn't I wear my shalwar kameez? Like if you were to box me, I would rather just be treated as that rather than trying to become something else. So that at that point, I wanted to show what Faiza was thinking, or what Masood Hashim thinks, after the trauma or after that incident happens, how do the parents react to it? Because we only see the child. We only see Zuhaib talking about it. We only see Nadia in the aftermath of the incident. But I almost felt like, I was like, why don't I give them a voice? And I did.
Do you have a favorite character?
I do actually. Gulshan.
Tell us a little bit about her.
So Gulshan was an add-on. She was supposed to be just in the background, never really have too much to say, or she didn't have page space. But as the story went on, I felt like Nadia needed some support, and she needed this feminine support. Because, life throws her so many punches that it just made sense for me to introduce Gulshan. And Gulshan is this like positive, life hasn't been kind to her either, but she's just a cheerleader, she's the support system that I think anyone and everyone should have in their lives. So she was my favorite character. I think the three main characters are too complicated for me to completely like, but I really enjoyed writing Gulshan.
Can you tell us a little bit about the title? I found it extremely fascinating. How did you come upon it? How did you decide that this was going to be the identifier for your novel?
So it's really, people ask me all the time, they're like, why Tippler pigeons? Like what's in your story that's about Tippler pigeons? Is it a story about pigeons? And I'm like, no, it's not. I actually just saw these pigeons. Whoever is from Karachi or has visited Karachi can see these Tippler pigeons sitting on electric wires. And it just intrigued me, and I, researched a little bit on them, and they're actually race birds. So there's a passage that I put, which I'm later going to read.
I prefer if you read it now so
Yeah,
we can
okay.
identify
We
with,
can do that.
with this image of the Tippler pigeon.
Yes. We have enough time, right?
Yeah, we have time.
Okay.
We have ample time.
So this perspective is from Misha, and she's based in Karachi, Pakistan. And Misha and Zuhaib are taking a walk at the sea view in Karachi. And so Baba goes, "Do you see that bird, Misha?" Baba asks, pointing to a string of pigeons lined up on the thick electric wires connected to the poles. "Baba, those are pigeons, not birds," I say coyly, as if I know so much more than him. "Well, yes, a pigeon is a kind of a bird. And do you know what kind of pigeons those are?" "I don't know. Grey pigeons?" "Haha," says Misha. "Misha, grey pigeons, that's the perfect type. Such a dodo you are," Bhai says, jeering. "So, grey pigeons can be a type of pigeon. What are you, a bird scientist?" I retort. "Bird scientist? You mean ornithologist?" Bhai keels over laughing. "Hey, hey, bache, don't make me regret bringing you here," Baba says sternly, his thick eyebrows raised in mock anger. "They're sort of grey, but they're also called Tippler pigeons," Baba resumes. "Oh, okay, I didn't know that. What's so special about them?" There are lots of things special about them. Firstly, they're very intelligent, just like you," he says to me, smiling broadly. I broaden my chest, just like I see Bhai doing when he feels proud about something he does and is complimented on it. I also manage to steal a glance towards Bhai, who makes a face at me, this time quietly. Second, they have exceptional endurance. What does that mean?" I ask, confused. Baba has this habit of using really big words sometimes. They fly right over my head before I can even pronounce them in my mind. "It means they're tough. They may not look like it, but they are. They can fly for almost an entire day, 20 hours or so. But they look so lazy, just sitting in a line, so idle, like they have no worries," Bhai says. "Yes, Suhaib, but we can't be so quick to judge, can we? You know, these birds are so tough and so intelligent that they're flying competitions they're entered into. People train them and then they get prizes if their Tippler wins. Sort of like a dog race, but for birds. And in the sky," I say smugly. "Yes, exactly like that. I can't believe it though. They look so peaceful, like they could sit on these wires all day," says Bhai, deep in thought. "Yes, beta. Just remember, sometimes things are not what they seem. Don't be fooled by the idle stance of the Tippler pigeon. Always make it a point to discover. Look, observe."
Fascinating. Well done.
Thank you.
So now we understand a little bit about
Yeah.
how the Tippler pigeon is
Yeah.
basically a symbol for all your characters.
Yes.
They may, it's almost like appearances are deceptive. Is that what you're
Yes.
trying to?
Yes, I think, I mean, when you start reading the book, you almost have impressions of these characters. And then during the progress of the book, you almost change your impressions. And I think that's what I was trying to achieve with the deeper meaning, you know, behind the Tippler pigeon.
So what you're trying to do is empowering the reader, encouraging them to peel back the layers and trying
Yes,
to
yes.
understand each character in a more deeper, more
Yes, for
profound
sure.
manner.
Taha, I had a friend who was an early reader of the novel, and I remember her saying that, you know, your novel is asking all the right questions, but is it answering them? And I said, no, because I don't want my novel to provide answers to the reader. I want them to interpret the story according to their lived experiences. You know, I want them to understand that yes, these are, you know, aspects of our society that need conversations around them. And I feel like my characters are not all good or all bad. You know, I in fact, I read a review which said something like, they're not necessarily likable. And I feel like as a writer, you don't have to write characters that have to be completely likable. You know, we're all kind of in the gray area. You know, we all kind of
Definitely.
suffer with questions which, you know, which mean that are we good people? Are we not? Do we always do good things? Do we do some things in the gray area? You know, and the characters should reflect that. It shouldn't be just the bichari or, you know, the tyrant man. I don't think life works like that, you know. There's always the in-between.
Undoubtedly, undoubtedly. So what are you working on next?
So this is something that I started in Iowa. There's a residency that I was attending. And I was working on something completely different. And I'd written about, I think, 10,000 words or something. And I picked it up and I said, you know, it's a writing residency. I should try to complete this. And I just disliked it so much that I was like, okay, I am not going to, I don't know where this story is going. So I started writing completely something different. And the new story is something that I've submitted as a thesis for my master's program. And it's a story about 4 friends, and they do their A-levels together. And then somehow I've tried to experiment with space. So there's a character who lives in Karachi. There are 2 characters who live in the US, and there's one that lives in Australia. So I've tried to push myself a little bit.
Interesting. I love how you're working with geography.
Yes.
Interesting. Because
I mean, there's an international debate, you know, going on at the moment that can you write characters, who can write white characters and who can write brown characters, you know. There's a debate where are you equipped to deal with a character of a different ethnicity, gender, culture, and I felt like I'm not ready for that, but I am ready to write characters in different spaces. Which also, you know, culturally is significant because a person who's lived somewhere outside of Pakistan has different experiences, and that's what makes them a different character. So, yeah.
Well, all the best with that. I think we should open the conversation to the audience.
Yeah.
If there are any questions, just raise your hand and we'll provide you with a mic.
No questions. Okay.
Yeah.
Hi. So you mentioned that your novel doesn't really answer questions. Rather, it sounds like it's something that's going to make us think critically. It'll make us question what's happening, perhaps. So pigeons, whatever little bit I know of the birds, for years they've been used as a global symbol of peace. Okay. So would you say that your book or your writing reflects on what's happening in the world right now, or is it, I mean, is there any connection?
Well, what's happening in the world right now cannot have, this was written 3 years ago. So the world was, I mean, I'd like to believe a better place. Not in terms of other invasions, but the current conflict cannot obviously, you know, be enrolled into this. But I think with literature, what happens is that you look at the microaggressions more than the political and the global landscape. I wish my readers to find peace in my writing, if that's something that, you know, the reader is looking for. But no, there is no connection at the moment.
Hi, I'm Razia. Safinah, I heard mention twice of writing about places that you've never lived in. So there was London in the idle stance of the Tippler Pigeon, and I think Australia in the
Next
latest
book, yeah,
venture that
yeah.
you haven't lived in Australia, right?
I haven't lived, but I've visited.
You visited. Does it terrify you to writing in places that you've never lived in?
Yes.
Somebody who's actually lived there might catch you out, because it happens a lot with me.
Definitely. I think that's the scariest thing for a writer, that if a reader says no, well, it doesn't happen like that here, you know. So the good part was that because the book was published in the UK, I had a British Pakistani editor, and then I had a British American editor. So anything that was kind of off, I think they corrected, but I think I did get my facts right. Because the last time I had visited, even in Melbourne right now, where my character is based in the next book, I was writing notes the entire time. So even, you know, the phrases they use, I wrote them down because then I'd make my character use them or somebody around him use them. So I'd be like, see, I know what Melbourne people do.
All right. That's a relief as a writer, because you can't always write about places you've lived in, right?
No, it gets complicated because especially I feel like, so one of my characters is in New Jersey and I was in New York recently, but I don't really know the transport system. So you know what train to take from New York to New Jersey, what kind of gynae hospitals are there, you know, what's the most famous pharmacy in Melbourne, you know, what kind of parking space you have for a person who lives in a unit, you know, so there's such like little details that if you get them wrong, the reader will really call you out. So I think that's good editing, and then like some research on your part as well, obviously.
Do we have another question? Yeah.
Hi, Safinah. So this is maybe not so much about the book itself, but about the writing process and how you've gotten into it. How, in terms of maybe if someone wants to start writing, what would you say to them? How would you encourage them? I mean, what should they be doing to get it right, I guess?
Okay. I think that writing is a very solitary and long process. For a new writer, one has to understand that you need to keep writing and you need to keep the belief that what you're doing will make sense to someone. Initially, when you start writing, I think nobody knows where to go from there. So when I started writing, people would give me really vague answers. You know, I'd be like, so how do you get into the publishing world? And they'd be like, you submit to journals. And I'm like, which journal? And they'll be like, Google it. And then I would Google it, and there'd be so many, you know, they'd be like, oh, go to the publisher's marketplace. So what I mean, I can speak from personal experience. What I started doing was I started attending events. And I would religiously attend every event that happened in Karachi. And then I would stay back and I would talk to people, you know, people who had already published. I was like, so how does it happen, you know, like, so how much do you need to write to be able to be taken seriously, you know? So as a publisher also, I get emails saying that I've written 3 poems. How do I publish them? And I'm like, don't right now, you know, like, please continue writing, have a good collection, have a novel, at least let me know that you've spent enough time and energy and effort and you're serious about this. And then will I go through your manuscript, because the people in the publishing world, they don't care if you've written 2 pages, you know. You have to be persistent, continue writing and continue believing in yourself that it will happen. It'll take time, but it will happen. And I think writing is also very cathartic, you know. I think I started writing for myself. And then later, you know, you start to find readers.
I suppose we're running out of time, so Safinah will be signing copies of her book downstairs at the Liberty Books stall. So hopefully I'll see you there. Thank you so much,
Thank you,
Safinah, and
Taha.
all the
Thank you
best
so
for all your writing endeavors, and thank you for being a lovely audience.
Thank you.
See you around.